What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we have video number 2 for you, and this has been a much requested video, and that is a realistic sliders video for Madden 21. This is going to be my early sliders here for Madden 21. If you guys are going to be starting up franchises anytime sooner, you already have franchises and you want to play on adjusted sliders for more realistic gameplay. There are not going to be a ton of changes here because I find that the gameplay this year is slightly more realistic than last year. There are still a lot of bugs that we will have to work around, and the more we play the game and have a higher volume of games played and see some of the issues that we need to work around, these sliders will start to change as the year progresses. So you'll probably see multiple sliders videos as we go throughout the year, just like last year, but these are the sliders that I recommend starting off with. Number 1, for player skill, I recommend turning down the quarterback accuracy. Personally speaking, I still find that it's a little bit too easy at the beginning to pass with any quarterback. I can pass really well with a low overall quarterback, so I recommend turning this down so that you do miss some passes and make it a little bit more realistic in game. The next one that I want to talk about is wide receiver catching. That is the next one that is adjusted. We actually have this taken down 1 point. I've seen other people taking this down a few different points. 49 for me seems to be the sweet spot. Your wide receivers don't seem to drop as many passes as they have in the past. Now, last year we had to turn wide receiver catching up for users because great players would drop wide open passes for just about no reason, and it doesn't seem to be quite the same this year. Now, this slider could vary depending on how your games are going and how your franchise is playing. I would recommend taking it up a couple ticks if you're having issues with players dropping wide open passes that they shouldn't be dropping. But for right now, I find that the balance is at around 49 wide receiver catching. Everything else remains the same all the way down to pass coverage for the user defense. I find that it is better to have the pass coverage cranked up all the way to 60 because then they start to play a little bit more intelligently. One of the things that I've found this year is that with the slower defense and everything that they've added, the defense, the pass coverage, the players in pass coverage tend to play a little bit dumber. And another thing is they've pretty much eliminated the user in certain terms, so you need to kind of compensate a little bit because you could in the past with a good user compensate for the fact that your defense couldn't really cover and they didn't know what they were doing even if you had good defenders, and so since that's not the case this year and you can't manually compensate for them, you have to make them play good on their own, and that would be turning this up to about 60. Now I could see you guys going anywhere between the range of 50 to 60, but that's kind of here or there depending on how your experience is going. In terms of tackling, I'm going to have tackling down for both the user and the CPU because we don't see a lot of broken tackles until you start to turn these sliders down, and there are broken tackles in the NFL and you do want to see those from time to time. So we have that down to 48. Now the next slider that we're going to adjust is wide receiver catching for the CPU. The CPU has the same problem that we always have where they catch passes that your wide receivers don't, even if they're lower overall wide receivers. So we take their wide receiving catching down an extra point down to 48 to kind of compensate for that fact and get a little bit more of a realistic result. Now here is where some of the more drastic changes come into effect, and that is for the CPU skill. We turn their interceptions down all the way to 40 because they tend to pick off anything that's thrown to them, and if you don't turn it down, you'll basically throw interceptions to Randy Moss style defensive catches, and you don't want that. That's not realistic. And another thing to note that I do want to put in here is a lot of people turn the interception slider for the user up or down depending on what they're seeing. Personally speaking, I don't see why anybody would turn it down. I just haven't personally seen it where my user defenders catch too many interceptions. More often than not, actually, I think they drop interceptions that are considered easy interceptions that are thrown right to them. So I see no reason to turn the interception slider down. It should certainly stay at about 50 in my opinion, or go up if you're seeing too many dropped interceptions. That is one of the most unrealistic things that I think that I see in the game is too many dropped interceptions. So definitely consider watching that slider. The next one is the CPU pass coverage. coverage. The CPU pass coverage is a little bit better than the user pass coverage, so to even it out a little bit, I recommend you guys take it down to about 48. And then I take their tackling down to about 47 because, again, if you're playing on all Madden like I am, the CPU is going to be a bit better at tackling, and in order to make it so that you can break any tackles whatsoever, you might want to take it down a few points, and we have it down to 47. Now, a lot of other people will play with the field goal power slider. I think the field goal power slider is actually pretty all right where it's at. I could see it going a point or two one direction or the other, but I don't see a need for that. Field goal accuracy, we do take down to 45 because if you leave it on 50, it's pretty easy to hit all your field goals, and you do want occasionally missed field goals here and there because they are becoming more common in the NFL, so we take that down to 45. The next one is punt power. We find that it's a little bit too easy to punt a team to the other end of the field and back them up a little bit too easily, and you can get ridiculously long punts in this game, so we have to take punt power down just a couple notches to about 48, and we take punt accuracy down because what we find is that oftentimes it's too easy to coffin corner a punt real deep into the other end and get a team pinned back within their 5, and so in order to prevent that from being quite as easy with some of the lower overall punters, we have to take punt accuracy down and kind of set the good punters apart from the bad punters. Another adjustment here is that we're going to take kick power up to 52, and the reason we take kick power up to 52 is because not enough balls are kicked through the back of the end zone on kickoffs on the base slider, and that is the majority of kickoffs nowadays are kicked through the back of the end zone or kicked deep enough that nobody's going to return them, so we want to see a realistic result there. The next slider is actually injuries is going to be left at 25. Now, this is something that I'm going to be watching heavily throughout the year. I will certainly take your feedback on it if you guys want to leave it in the comments section. I've had a few people tell me that they get a lot of injuries, and it's kind of hard to get a realistic injury result in a Madden game because everybody, they don't want their players to get injured, but in reality, players get injured constantly in the real NFL. So it's something you have to deal with. It's something that you need to leave there, but they might be happening a little bit too often this year. I think that from what I've heard and what I've seen, is players do tend to get injured a little bit more this year than they have in the past. So, I would maybe consider taking this slider up a bit if you're having an issue with too many injuries. But what I've seen is that there are additional injuries added into the game, so you'll be getting a wider variety and things like that. So maybe that will help things out. This is just a slider that I say kind of leave where it is and play with it, see how it works, and then change it as necessary. The fatigue slider is one that's important to me. We take up 1 point because I find that it's too easy to just leave your starters on the field the entire game. That's not true to a true NFL game. In an NFL game, players are rotating in and out constantly. Even top-tier players have to come off the field from time to time, and there is more emphasis on stamina this year in Madden 21, but something that doesn't happen very often is your players rotating out as necessary. Now, some way that you can do that, you can improve upon that, is by changing your auto subs, and I recommend taking those up into the 70s or 80s so your players actually sub onto the field. But another way to do that is to get starters tired quicker by turning the fatigue up 1 point. Minimum speed threshold is something that is absolutely worth talking about because of the fact that in past years we've needed to adjust it. I'm leaving it on the base right now because of the fact that they've slowed down a lot of players in the game, so there does feel like a greater difference between the fast players and the slow players in this game. So we might not need to change the speed threshold this year, something certainly to watch as we go forward. The next one that we're going to change is we're going to take false start up 2. I find that they don't happen quite as often as they do in the NFL, so it's a little bit better to turn it up a couple ticks and try to get a couple more of those penalties called from time to time. I know that they get annoying for people, but it is realistic to get false start penalties, at least a couple times in a game. Defensively speaking, we take defensive pass interference all the way up to 60. If you leave it on the base, you're not going to see any defensive pass interference calls. This is something that you absolutely need to crank up pretty far. Another one is I've seen a lot of people taking intentional grounding off. I don't know I don't really understand the logic behind that, but personally speaking, I like leaving intentional grounding on because I don't like whenever you can just throw the ball away from inside the pocket. It just presents an unrealistic result, so I would leave that on. And then the only other adjustment is taking illegal block in the back down 1 point. I do see them more often than they actually happen in the NFL, so something worth considering there. So these are the sliders. I'll go ahead and scroll up one more time if you guys want to take some screenshots of these. These aren't going to be perfect sliders. Like I said, these are an early set of sliders, and this is just based on a minimal number of games actually played. As we get further into the season, these things will change, and we'll have a more consistent result for you guys, a better slider set as the season progresses, something that'll produce even more realistic results. But hopefully this helps you guys out in some way, or at least gets you started in the right direction of thinking how you want to adjust your sliders. If it does, make sure you guys leave a like on the video, comment down below with what you guys would like to see next, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Like I said, I hope it helped you out. If it does, leave that feedback. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you have a good night. See ya.